Hi guys, it's Jeff at Slavens Racing. This video is about how to set shock preload, shock spring preload. And so first of all, why do we even want to do that? And that is to keep the bike in correct balance. So if you've watched our previous video on balance, that will explain what balance is and why you want to have good balance. But the spring load, the amount of preload that's on that shock spring and the amount of sag determines how the bike will handle. All right, so the tools that it takes to do that. There's lots of tools on the market. You can spend anywhere from $10 for a tape measure on up to $100 and some for a fancy one. So I'm going to talk about what most suspension videos out there to tell you how they tell you to do it. There's lots of methods that different suspension shops use. There's lots of videos out there on the subject. It's a well beat down subject, and then I'm going to tell you why I disagree with all of them. All right, so if you want to go by the book and use set your sag according to the numbers, first of all you got to realize that the numbers are just a number. They're just a starting point. They're not the end all be all. If you hit that number, doesn't mean you're going to have a perfectly great handling bike. It's just the starting point, and I'll explain that later in the video. All right, so tools. We've got this nice little Motion Pro tool here that you fasten into your axle and then go up to the fender. And on KTM's, all the new ones have a little place right here, and it says sag. So there's a little arrow right here that says sag, and they want you to measure straight up. Some companies want you to measure at an angle. Some brands and some suspension tuners want you to measure at an angle because the rear wheel kind of goes in an arc. I disagree with that because we're not measuring suspension travel, we're measuring how much the whole bike moves up and down. So I don't really like that method. Another tool here is made by DRC. It can only be used on motocross bikes because the under fender that holds the taillight on these enduro models gets in the way. It clamps onto the fender and it goes down to the axle. That's another easy device. These are pretty popular. I don't use any of them. I don't even use this. But you can also just use a tape measure and go from the axle up to this point up here and measure to get your sag numbers. And you always want to look in your owner's manual, and it will give you the sag number in there. On KTM's, it's usually in the 100 to 110 millimeter range. Of all the different methods that are out there, some companies and videos say sit on the bike right in the middle. Some companies or some videos say sit in a comfortable position where you normally ride. Other ones say stand. All right, so the problems with all those methods. You should be sitting directly above the foot pegs, but if you move a quarter inch one way or another, you're going to skew the numbers. And who knows if that slightly forward or slightly back, which is actually the correct place to sit. Some videos say to sit in that relaxed position, so it's going to be farther back. Well, that's going to change the spring rate. That creates its own set of issues. Other videos and companies say to stand. Well, if you're a tall guy, your position is going to be different than a really short guy, because when you lean forward or backwards on the bike, you're going to put more pressure on the suspension one way or the other. So all those have their own set of problems, and that's why I don't use any of them, don't like any of them. And also, I don't know why, but consumers just have a difficult time with setting sag. We can send them a spring that we know is correct, tell them to put the correct preload on it before they install it, and then they come back and give us really wonky numbers that we know are incorrect. So when I did suspension here in town for many, many years, customers, the local guys would call me up and say, you sold me the wrong spring, I can't get the sag numbers. I'd say, bring the bike over, and instantly I would have the sag numbers correct. I don't know why. These guys are not dumb guys, they're smart guys, educated guys, but they just couldn't get the numbers right. So for all those reasons, I do not like any of them, any of those methods for setting sag. And my method is pretty common among suspension tuners. So what I do, I go to our chart. Our chart is very accurate. It's from the KTM factory. And it covers, each spring rate covers about 22 pounds of rider weight. But the first thing you have to do is be honest about your weight and plug in the correct weight number into that chart, and you'll get the correct spring. And some guys want to claim that our springs are soft or they're stiff, you know, they don't test correctly. Wrong. They test correctly. We are very adamant about our springs testing correctly and being high quality and maintaining their rate. So bottom line is follow the chart and you'll get the correct spring rate. All right, and so when you're using that chart, make sure that you weigh all your gear, or preferably just put all your gear on and then get on the scale. That way you're really going to have an accurate, you know, put water in your bladder, your water bladder, probably put like half in there because it's going to be somewhere in between all the time. But put all that on, get on the scale and get an accurate number. And the other thing we run into is guys say, well, I weigh this now, but I'm on a diet, I'm going to get down 30 pounds. Well, that's a whole another spring rate. So you're probably not going to achieve that lighter weight overnight, so you might have to just buy different springs at a later date. But do not try to compensate for what might happen in the future with your weight, because we all like to eat donuts and you might not get there. All right, guys, so the way I do mine, I go to the chart, I pick out the correct spring rate for my weight. I'm 210 without gear. I'm about 235, 240 with gear. I plug that in. I grab that spring. I go to the owner's manual, and KTM owner's manuals, any of the KTM brands, it gives you the spring preload in there, and it's usually between 7 and 10 millimeters. Most models it's around 7 or 8 or 9. But anyhow, whatever that number is, compress the spring or preload the spring that amount. That's what the word preload means, is how much you're preloading the spring, how much you're compressing the spring. So measure, back the adjuster off, measure, well actually if you got a new spring, just measure the spring length when it's just laying on the bench by itself, and then compress the spring with the adjuster, the 7 to 10 millimeter preload setting that the manual says to do. All right, so that's what I do. I think on these new bikes, I forgot what it is. I'm going to say it's 8 millimeters. Anyhow, put the spring on, preload at 8 millimeters, bolt it on, and ride it. And that's going to get you as close as any sag setting that you've ever used. All right, so from there, if I'm pretty sensitive about the chassis balance. I've been doing this for 50 plus years. So from there, I'll adjust it while I'm on the trail, if I need to change the balance of the bike a little bit. So if I feel like the friend's pushing just slightly, I'll tighten the spring up. I'll pull over and I'll tighten the spring up a turn. If I feel like it's a little twitchy, I'll go the opposite direction. I'll back it off a turn. And maybe one turn's not enough. Maybe you'll have to go a turn and a half, maybe only 3/4 of a turn, whatever. But you can just do it while you're on the trail. But for most guys, you don't have, and I'm not trying to offend anybody, but most guys don't have great enough feel to feel the difference between one turn, the difference one turn makes. So if you just put the correct preload on there, choose the correct spring off of our chart, and go ride, you're going to be a pretty happy camper. The bike's going to be in balance, it's going to work very well, and maybe later on, after you get the feel of the bike better, you might want to tweak it a little bit, or just tweak it as an experiment to see. Try tightening up a turn and see how that makes the chassis respond, or back it off a turn. And then there's also some variations too. Like if you're a high-speed desert racer and you're 4th, 5th, 6th gear pinned all day long, then you want less preload. You want to actually make the bike squat a little bit in the back so that it'd be more stable on all that high-speed stuff. If you are a supercross rider, those guys do the same thing. They squat them just a little bit in the back to make them more stable in the whoops. If you're a hard enduro guy, you might want to go the opposite direction. You might want to make it slightly biased towards the front. But you'll have to determine that yourself. All right, so This probably sounds crazy. My method probably sounds crazy to some of you guys, but I called 3 other suspension guys that I have had relationships with for years, and I respect their work and their knowledge. And I asked them one question: what's the sag setting on your new bike? The answer was the same on all of them. I don't know. And why didn't they know? Because they do it my method. They don't use sag numbers. They preload. They put the preload on the spring. They go out and ride it. It's not quite the way they want it. They change it by turning it a little bit one way or the other. I was out riding with a friend just a few weeks ago, and I asked him about his sag. Same question, same answer. He didn't know because he does it my method. And you can drive yourself crazy with trying to get correct sag numbers because of the things I mentioned before, by changing your position slightly. You know, there's just too many variables that way. It just doesn't work. I think it's a completely flawed method to do it. I see guys, I've been to GNCC races many times over the years. I see the guys doing a last minute adjustment on their sag. Their mechanic is doing a quick pulling out the tape measure and checking their sag before they head to the starting line. To me, it's you're late to the party at that point. You should have figured that out before you ever got there. And your sag numbers shouldn't have changed from when you were back at the shop between then and the time you got to the racetrack. So why are you doing that? That seems like a futile effort to me. All right, guys, I hope this helps you out a little bit. Just to review here real quickly, use our spring chart, put on the correct amount of preload that the factory manual says to use, and bolt it on and go ride and have a great time. And don't obsess about the exact correct sag number, because those numbers are somewhat useless. All right, I think that's about all for now. Please like us on Instagram and Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, and stop by the store sometime. Hope to see you out on the trail. That's all for now.